Welcome back, everybody. We are coming towards the end of our day here in the Americas playoffs for Hearthstone Grandmasters Season 2. My name is Sossel, joined once again by the phenomenal Alex Barros. Abel.
Wow. So complimentary.
I know. Like, I never give any of the full-timers any compliments. So I've got to work on it somehow, right? Like, maybe I can bring it into my game as we move forward. But we have a fantastic matchup for you. Two of the very best of the Americas going up against each other with everything on the line here, because both of these players technically have a loss in the bracket already. Purples, you actually saw on stream. Muzzy has given the default loss as the player coming in as the lowest seed, the 4th place finisher from his division.
Yeah, it looked like, based on my viewing experience, that Purple's Zoo Warlock deck is what really failed him in that last series. It was an archetype that we saw have success for Silvername over in the European region. So perhaps there is still some hope for the Zoo Warlock. We just haven't had the sample size yet to definitively say one way or another. And it is still an option available to Purple to play this series.
And not only for Silvername, but as Dan pointed out, for Tom60229 as well over in APAC, who made it through playoffs, but has also lent on Zoo this entire season and used it to qualify for playoffs and then make his way through that playoffs bracket as well. So it did look to be underperforming for Purple in the last series, but I hate to call you up on it, Abar, but there's another deck that looks like it might be underperforming a little bit in this playoffs bracket so far.
If you are asking me to back down, I'm going to tell you right now, I will double down, Soddle.
Excellent.
I still think this deck is the nuts. I think it is the wave of the future. I think it is the soon-to-be meta king of the Dooms in the Tomb post-rotation meta game. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yup.
I think it's good.
Well, you can see that the new king, as far as Abar is concerned, is going to go up directly against the old king. This is the combo priest coming out from Purple. We saw a lot of priest mirrors being thrown out in the Europe bracket. I don't think we've seen too many of those so far on the Americas side. A lot more Shaman-focused gameplay, with a lot of these players really leaning heavily into what this practice group with Muzzy and just saying, Tyler is there as well, Orange is there. A bunch of Grandmasters have got together and prepped over the last few days. And that's why you see all of these players playing from the same location there if you are paying attention to that webcam. And so far their group is having a decent amount of success.
I know you folks at home can't see it, but my body language has exactly mirrored Muzzy's so far, where I grimaced right along with him as I saw this horrible opening hand enter his hand right after I doubled down on this particular deck list. But then I also gave the exact same nod Muzzy did as the Lickum entered the fray. That is a critical resource for this matchup specifically.
Yes, indeed. Lickum fixes everything. And I have been playing Devil's Advocate, certainly, just partially to irritate Abar and partially just to stimulate interesting conversation. I started off saying, like, hard disagreeing with you and saying that I would have brought Quest Shaman to this tournament. Then reflecting on it more, I realized I was thinking too much in terms of ladder and not what I was expecting to see in this tournament. One of the things I was expecting to see in this tournament was still a lot of combo priest. And the one thing that I absolutely will not fight you on is that I would rather be this token shaman in the matchup against priest than I would be Quest Shaman against priest.
Especially with this slow start that Purple is off to. Turn 1 pass, turn 2 coining out the injured Blade Master plays quite nicely into this Lickum. I imagine if you are Muzzy here, you are suspecting that maybe the reasoning behind this start is that Purple is trying to prepare himself for a Psycho Bomb. But so far, that's not what Purple's working with. He's just looking at curving into his second injured Blade Master.
Yes.
Not many other options that are looking too appealing.
And also, I raised this question. I've fought with multiple people over this, just, you know, both in testing, in a couple of practice sessions that I've had with players and with co-casters as well. Where do you stand on this leave your opponent's injured Blade Master alive to play around Psycho Pomp argument? Because I think it's nonsense.
I fully agree with you that it's nonsense. It is so important to keep a priest board clear. Psycho Pomp is, at almost any phase of the game, going to be a valuable resource, whether it's on curve or not. Sometimes they don't have the Psycho Pomp at all, in which case you just left a minion on priest board for no good reason. I think there's way too many outcomes where it's a punishment to leave the injured Blade Master there that perhaps people are guilty of tunneling on the negative outcomes because they feel so bad.
Yeah, I also think, like, you know, just in terms of what the negative outcomes are, like, there are 2 Psychopomps in their deck and, like, double figures worth of cards that buff, restore, or otherwise leveraging them having a minion in play, right? So the bad outcome is worse when you leave a minion alive that can attack. That's when Priest shines.
That is what I said, but a strange combination of blunt and eloquent that I enjoyed.
Purple, scrappy game from his side here, but Abar, these are the turns where Shaman starts to be able to do some pretty gross things, but they're also the turns that are the hardest to navigate through. So as our resident token Shaman expert, pressure's on. Do you see anything particularly broken that can happen this turn?
I won't go so far as to say broken. I'm looking at 2-turn setups to get this Sea Giant on the board. Sea Giant isn't your most valuable resource in this matchup because if you are at the point where you're securing a board state against Priest, you are sort of already ahead. But if you can find a spot to get it down in the mid-game, it's still very valuable. Flesh Shaper is a little uncomfortable here without the mutate. To use that as a resource to trade into the Wild Pyromancer. I'm guessing Muzzy is headed towards zapping the Pyromancer and using the last charge on his Lickum, as he appears to be, clearing off the remainder of Purple's board with his Flesh Shaper, and simply hoping it sticks around for a while.
Sure. One thing I do want to pick up on here, and that Pyromancer appearing is very appropriate to what I'm about to say, is that Sea Giant is absolutely not essential. You know, one of the things you've been talking about as a big upside of this deck is that all of your small stuff is so much more threatening in this deck than it is in the opposing version of Quest Shaman. But I do think Sea Giant is quite important against Priest because it takes you from a position where maybe you have a board that your opponent can nuke with Pyromancer to a board that, like, you're going to clock them no matter what because you have an 8/8, right? And I do think that's quite important in certain positions. Not as important as that draw from Muzzy, though.
That's an important one.
Finally, I feel like we've seen 2 whole days without a Mogu high roll onto the 8-drop. I'm glad we're finally seeing one.
Better late than never. We also haven't seen any high reeks in the sense of journalistic integrity. I want to make sure we stay balanced here.
Full journalistic integrity on me. Okay. the yin and yang of the Mogu evolved, the high roll and the high reek.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well done. That was a good one.
Thank you.
It's right there with the ornery tortoise.
It's nowhere near as good as that. But I have to let everyone forget about that again before I can bring it up.
You have best.
There it is.
Yeah, that seems about right. And that is the power of that Shaman deck. That is a really, really strong matchup. Like, let's not forget, this version of the deck is heavily influenced by Jambray's build of Shaman that he put together before this event. Yes. Very, very similar in philosophy and game plan. And Jambray built that deck because he just couldn't stand losing to Priests anymore. Right. And then he was massively successful with it, posting, I believe, a 70% plus win rate over Priest over the course of, 100+ games towards the end of the season. And he finished right towards the top of the ladder reaches playing that deck. So it already had a good matchup against Priest. Priest is exactly the same. That deck has got a bunch of shiny new toys to add on top of it as well. So you can see why that matchup in particular, if you are expecting Priest in this tournament, I am kind of slowly converting over to Team Abar here in terms of it. You want to have that token Shaman in your pocket as opposed to the Quest Shaman.
And I can't stress enough that that hand did nothing until the Lickum entered it. I mean, the Lickum cleared his turn 2 play, cleared his turn 3 play, and then significantly contributed to clearing his play a couple more turns down the line. Only 2 mana was spent on that card along the way. It is such a valuable tempo resource when the key number is 3 when it comes to Priest minion health.
Yes, and we saw the exact difference in, I believe, one of Hunter Ace's series yesterday, where he had a similar hand, right? He had a couple of bad overload cards in his hand and not a lot else. He had like a zap and a lightning bolt, right? So a minion came down, he zapped it. A minion came down, he lightning bolted it. then the next minion came down. It's like, oh, I'm just out of stuff now. Like, what do I do? Whereas if you're able to clear all those minions out with the Lickum instead, you start to build up resources for big explosive turns later on. But based on what we are being shown, it looks like Muzzy is now going to divert to his Holy Wrath Paladin to take on this Priest from purple. Another matchup that there has been a little bit of debate on, Abar. And again, since we've got you here, do you have a take on this matchup?
I sure do. It was a matchup that, as Holy Wrath Paladin started to become popular in Grandmasters, part of the reason it increased in popularity was that it was claimed to be, and we've heard this story before, it was claimed to be a priest counter. The more the matchup played out, the more definitively that was proven to not at all be an accurate statement.
Right.
The matchup is about 60% favored in the side of the priest. I actually tweeted out some of these stats that I was keeping on Priest toward Ixar, the game designer. Monsanto responded to my tweet saying, boy, I wish you never did this, because people keep queuing Paladin into my Priest thinking it wins, and he was using that as an advantage in his matches, happily accepting that matchup from the Priest side. Monsanto tends to be ahead of the game on those kind of things, which is why you see him secure a playoff spot yet again.
Yes, you do indeed. And you saw yesterday when he was tweeting, talking about talking with Purple, in fact, where Purple said, I don't think you should have banned Priest in this series. And Monsanto had an explanation as to why that was. And then just on that level of like mind games and misinformation, Bloodyface responded to Purple saying, well, like, just with a thinking face emoji, essentially, just like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And Purple responded, have I got you nice and confused for our match tomorrow now? So you can see, like, the misinformation campaign is a very, very real thing in this tournament.
Just so entertaining.
Yeah.
Win, lose, meme. Purple's always entertaining.
I also find 2-mana Emperor Thaurissan extremely entertaining.
That, my friend, is what dreams are made of.
Sure is. Yet to see the 50 damage or the 50+ damage really coming into play in a single turn. So far, Emperor has just been used as a acceleration tool, essentially. Just, you know, spend more mana, drawing more cards, and clearing more boards quicker. Therefore, you get to your 2-turn 25+25 quicker than you would otherwise, which is kind of where I theorized it would end up. I agree the 50 damage thing is cute and lovely if you can pull it off, but it does seem like a ridiculously greedy thing to try and do, where we've seen Holy Wrath Paladin has problems with managing hand size. So if you start getting into this position where like, well, I'm going to hold on to all of these exact perfect cards so I get the exact perfect discounts, you're going to run into trouble.
I would liken this Holy Wrath Paladin deck, as I did on yesterday's broadcast, again, to Freeze Mage. The Freeze Mage decks of old, where you see the Emperor Thaurissan in the deck, and you start out by trying to tell yourself, okay, what is this discounting to set up these maximum damage turns, these incredible one-turn lethals?
Yep.
And then as you learn the deck more and more, you find, you know what? It's about finding the Emperor Thaurissan that's good enough, so you can get it out there as soon as possible so that you can benefit from the efficiency acceleration that the card provides, more so than the win condition acceleration.
Frost Nova Doomsayer on 5, Emperor on 6. Every game, baby. Let's go. That's just how you play.
It continues to amaze me, Saddle, that Zephyrus entered this deck as a way to deal 30 damage in one turn. You know, you can use the Holy Wrath, 25 damage, swing your True Silver, play your Zephyrus, get a Soulfire off of it, boom, 30 damage in one turn.
Yep.
Elven Archer still survived the cut as Zephyrus entered the deck. We get a whole new set of cards entering the standard metagame. Emperor Thaurissan, we have to make room for that one somewhere. Elven Archer still survives the cut.
All right. We might be about to have our first fight here, Ava. Okay, so you have to play a certain number of one-attack minions, right, in order for Christology to have consistent value?
Yes.
So there almost has to be another minion to come into the deck instead of Elven Archer?
Right.
Do you have something that you prefer to play in that spot?
So the initial reason that Elven Archer made perfect sense as the last one-drop, one-attack minion you wanted to put into the deck was that back in the pre-nerfed Mage Days with, jeez, I'm totally blanking, Luna's Pocket Galaxy.
Sure.
Before Pocket Galaxy was nerfed, it was so important to equality a Mountain Giant and then ping it off so that they didn't Conjurers calling it. So that was a crucial interaction that initially justified the inclusion of the Elven Archer. With that interaction long gone, it has stuck around. I do wonder, to answer your question, if a card like Crystallizer makes sense to allow you to Flash of Light on turn 2 for value after you reduce your own life total.
Okay.
I agree that the fact that Elven Archer costs 1 mana helps the hand space issues of this deck. I'm not 100% convinced that dealing 1 damage randomly at some point in the mid-game is still relevant. I wonder how much people have even looked into it or just decided it isn't worth the time to figure out.
I take your points and respectfully disagree. Elven Archer.
I know.
Elven Archer is the nuts.
Do you disagree because you want it to be, or because you think it is?
No, I think it has enough use for it. I think it has synergy with Subdue, as you're about to see. I think you can play Zephyrus for a board clear in situations, and then you still have that 30 damage that you were talking about because you have an Elven Archer available. And I think, you know, still the most compelling argument is like, well, what other one-attack minions do I really want to play here? Like, we've seen... I'm aware that we haven't talked about this game of Hearthstone for a very long time. Purple got huge minions in play that couldn't get removed, and he drew Divine Spirit in a fire. Like, I'm sorry, if you need analysis for that one, you can do it yourself. But, you know, the most compelling argument to me is just like, what's better? Because we used to see like Bloodsail Corsair, is that the right name of the pirate in that position?
Yes.
To like remove one durability from Wagglepick when Wagglepick was a terror. But right now, like, is destroying weapons really that relevant? Like, maybe that's something people can look at. But to me, Elven Archer is just, yeah, it's probably card number 28, 29, 30 in the list, but I think it still makes it.
Yeah, my last comment on the actual gameplay that we just witnessed for those following that aspect of the broadcast was Paladin favored, by the way. My last comment there.
Yeah, I think that just about sums it up. You know, I have my soundbite that I've rolled out time and time again on this matchup that I think there's always a turn where you could die in that matchup as a Paladin. And I think that just goes to speak that, you know, Priest always has the opportunities to do the aggressive things. And I think also from the Priest side, you can play the matchup in a variety of ways and still be successful. We saw the very aggressive way where we didn't really get into the rhythm of talking about the game by the time it ended, that Purple had there. You can also do the opposite, where you as the Priest draw your deck quicker than the Paladin player draws their deck, and then you just out-resource them and continue to build boards and pressure them. That's very real as well. So when there's that much scope to like play the matchup in different ways and still be successful, I personally just think you have to call that a Priest-favored matchup. It's absurd to me.
Right there with you. I think timeout timing is incredibly difficult in that matchup, is one last thing that I would add, as it is often correct to simply not cast that card on turns where we can see the Priest player had lethal and then you look silly. You live with those. But Purple headed over to the Shaman. This is the Quest including Shaman build, the more traditional Shaman we have seen throughout the course of Season 2, whereas Muzzy is going right back to the Holy Wrath Paladin. We have ample matchup on this data. It is one of the reasons that players bring Paladin to these tournaments.
Absolutely.
And it is significantly favored in Muzzy's way.
And Purple, however, did go down in history, will forever be remembered as a legend, at least in my mind, for finally giving us the Spell Ward Jeweler against Paladin outcome in this matchup in one of his previous weeks. I think he had something like 7 turns of face immunity against a Holy Wrath Paladin from Jewelers, from Bog Sloshers, from Shudderwock, and so on. And then amazingly, he still needed to generate a Witch's Brew to win the game at the end of all that, which I think, first off, that's really sweet, and I'm glad we saw it. But secondly, I think that gives us the answer on whether Spell Ward Jeweler is like good enough to have a significant impact on this matchup, right?
Win, lose, or meme, he's always entertaining.
There you go, yeah. But he has no such thing this time, but he does have a couple of sets of 3 bunny rabbits and 2 cards that turn them into big chunky boys in the mid-game, which can certainly put on a lot more pressure than this deck used to do through those mid-game turns. Used to be as Paladin, if you draw 1 Consecration, you feel like you are absolutely chilling against Evolved Shaman's early game pressure. They have very niche ways that they can generate a board of 3/3s, but it's very hard for them to do. But these days, now with that Desert Hair addition, then they struggle to answer those from the Paladin side. Just much more efficient stats in play in the early game.
Yeah, Purple, in my opinion, has the most interesting build of Quest Shaman in this tournament. We've seen a lot of players cut cards like the former champ and the Witchwood Piper out of the deck to make room for the Desert Hare Evolve package. Purple has left out the former champs as well, but he has valued the Witchwood Piper enough that he shaved a weaponized Wasp from his deck, and additionally only has one copy of Mind Control tech. So he cut a few of those resources that this deck relies on to fight for board state more significantly, because he values the engine that is the Witchwood Piper so highly that he refuses to remove that card from his deck. I imagine that makes you a happy camper.
It does to an extent, yeah. I've been meaning to ask Purple for a number of weeks now, because it was the Mind Control text that he cut out for his Spell Ward Jewelers in the deck as well. And I do want to ask him, like, how much of that is just a philosophical thing for him, because I know he hates the card Mind Control tech. Like, he hates that it's really swingy, hates how it feels to play and how it feels to play against. So, like, you know, Purple is that kind of guy, but like, no, I'm just going to not play this card because I don't want to. I don't like it, and you can't make me.
As a man who didn't put Yogg Saron in his Druid deck in his playoff lineup...
Yeah, that was just wrong.
With the championship on the line. It was objectively incorrect, but I didn't want my fate decided by Yogg Saron.
By the way, Elven Archer that turn, the nuts, taking care of that 3-1.
I was waiting for this moment, don't you worry.
Yeah.
So on turn 1, he Crystallogied. If he had found the Crystallizer, he could have pointed out, and then he had the Flash of Light in his hand to play on curve on turn 2. I bet he would have liked for his life total to have been padded a bit more here, but we'll see, we'll see.
Sure.
Meanwhile, something we haven't mentioned yet is that timeout flipping to 25 mana is painful for Muzzy. That is an incredibly valuable resource in this matchup, incredibly powerful card in general in any matchup that is trying to aggressively pressure the Paladin.
Yes.
0 mana Shrivala, certainly useful, but that is a tall price to pay.
Let me think.
It is. The Shivala is relevant, though, as you say. I think this is a matchup where your opponent can sometimes struggle to take back the board if you're able to land Shivala and swing the ball back in your favor. Sometimes you can just win by dominating the board from that position. So that could be a relevant factor later on. Good sequencing here from Muzzy, recognizing that he can keep his 3-1 Pyromancer hanging around. And if Muzzy can ever get a free turn onto this board, he can start to do some actually pretty high-tempo plays with Emperor Thaurissan, with Shivala and a Baleful Banker in his hand. Like, he can really start to dominate this board state if Purple is not incredibly aggressive with what he develops himself.
Curious how close this Zephrys is to being active. I imagine there's still at least a couple of 2-ofs remaining in the deck. But I do expect Emperor Thaurissan to come down sooner rather than later, reduce the cost of that Zephrys back down to 4, make it a little bit more manageable to use as a tempo tool. This is very much not a matchup where you need to be dealing 50 damage in one turn, so Thaurissan sooner rather than later has a lot of appeal.
Right. Don't think it's going to get better than a board state with just a 3-3 sat on it, right? Seems like as good a time as any.
Makes sense to me.
Just 14 more turns to go before that timeout becomes playable again.
You're gonna have to take a lot of time out before that starts to be a castable card. I don't see any particularly clean ways to deal 5 to this Emperor Thaurissan either. Ideally, you would like to be able to get it off the board and continue to use your minions as resources to push face damage. Currently, nothing of that variety is directly available in a 1-for-1 scenario. Kolbolaki can deal 4. He can additionally pressure it down with the Mogu Flesh Shaper, but that isn't a trade you're particularly happy with. I imagine he might go fishing with this Sludge Slurper for an alternative answer.
The Eternal Arrow of Conflict. I'm sure we're all familiar with seeing that come out from our opponent. Point damage base, point damage at key minion. I think particularly those of you who played back during the last Emperor Thaurissan meta, or perhaps like the Fandral Staghelm meta, will be very familiar with that, where players really, really, really want to go face, but are terrified of the minion that you have in play.
Purple missed the immediate face damage in this line, but what he did is he took a turn that is awkward and hard to come by.
Right.
And use it to fill up his hand with resources that translate into direct damage. So more of a setup turn in a sense.
And with that Holy Wrath draw, I believe it is just Novice Engineer that he is waiting for at this point. I think those were the only 2 duplicates remaining in the deck before that first Holy Wrath was drawn.
I wonder.
This is a kind of awkward looking turn here for Muzzy though. Subdue does reduce some of the damage in play, but he doesn't really have anything to go with it in terms of just filling out a turn. He could take a Shivala turn alongside the Subdue and like try and get it to dominate the board. But yeah, I think with nothing better to do really, just continue to draw cards is stance number 1. There is Novice Engineer, so we will see next turn if that Zephyrus is active when we pass back to Muzzy.
With 2 Kobold Lackeys alongside the Life Drinker, Purple has a range of 14 damage in hand. Alongside the 9 on the board would be a total of 23. Muzzy started this turn at 25. So no immediate lethal.
Kobold, he can use Goblin Lackey now to push 2 damage that will not always be push damage if he wants to go down that line. The Kobold Lackey from hand will always deal 4. The Goblin Lackeys will require minions in play that can push damage.
I wonder.
Also with double Bog Slosher in hand. Yikes. Muzzy, it's going to be one of those games where Muzzy is going to need to lean on his timeouts to get himself over the line. And as we keep talking about, he only has 1 of those available to him because of that Shivala flip.
Fortunately for Muzzy, this is an incredibly difficult matchup on the Shaman side to continue to pressure while not developing anything onto the board, which means the Shirvala's ability to rush in, immediately gain 7 life. If he times it perfectly, we'll buy him an entire extra turn here.
There you go, active Zephyrus. And there's only a 1-of True Silver and a 1-of Acolyte in the deck, so yeah, it was the Novice that activated it.
Worth noting as well for those who do not recall at home, Crystal Smith Kangor was used very early on in this game, so Muzzy does not have the option to pair that with the Shirvala.
Right. Six cards remaining. True Silver, timeout. Try and set yourself up a win condition. If you need to bail out on the following turn. I think with 1 timeout, I'm certainly struggling to see a way that gets me to the bottom of my deck to guarantee that I end this.
I'm with you in that I am also looking at opportunities to find lethal in the near future.
Yep.
However, I'm looking at Hammer of Wrath as opposed to True Silver to thin my deck 1 more card.
Sure.
So I'm looking at Hammer timeout.
Move quickly.
You can still go True Silver, Shivala, Banker. I mean, yeah, you need the Holy Wrath first and foremost, right? You're still missing that right now.
Right.
That's step 1 of the equation. Crystology just drawing a Novice, has to spend the last 2 on playing the timeout. That Novice is going to bite the dust.
Purple has the luxury of using Life Drinker purely for the life gain aspect right now, if he so chooses, as he still has a plethora of Kobold Lackeys and Bog Sloshers to return them to make sure he can get across the finish line. So keeping his own life total up 30 limits the potential lethal range out of Muzzy. Notably, the Elven Archer, as we made a big deal of, is no longer a resource.
Yes, very smart play from Purple. All right, hear me out. Wacky Worlds time.
I'm in.
Shivala, Banker your Shivala. Zephyrus, Brawl. Interested?
Zephyrus plus Banker is 6 mana, leaving you with 4.
There's this one on the Banker on the left is 1.
Ah, okay, you're looking at the leftmost Banker, my apologies. There's the Holy Wrath. I am intrigued. But we know there's a life drinker in Purple's hand.
Yes.
You do get to gain 7 off of that play, bumping in the Shivala before you brawl.
Let
But
me
Muzzy's life total is
move
15.
quickly.
Let's go Nova instead.
Your wish is my suggestion.
So if he Novas here, crucially,
There's only one board space.
only one board space.
That is a big deal, actually. Yeah, that was the reason why I did kind of like didn't like this, because you. Whoa! I was gonna say because you ended the turn at 8 health. He then played the Shivala. I was like, okay, maybe you don't end the turn at 8 health. But then I was about to say, hang on, if he trades with a minion, he's opening up board space again. And then he just left it there.
Muzzy did not shuffle this
Nope.
Shivala back.
No, he did not.
Which means things can go wrong here. So I was actually immediately looking at Mogu Flesh Shaper to trade in to clear the Divine Shield first, and then have Purple evolve so that any minion that he generates with 5 or 4 more attack, you can then Goblin Lackey and trade in to clear off the Shivala once the shield is popped.
I wonder.
Purple starting with the evolution here can still do the same turn, so yeah, that makes perfect sense. Mogu's Flesh Shaper is still an option to trade in first to clear the Divine Shield. And
So-
then Muzzy is left without a Shivala.
Just no win condition in his deck and slowly fatiguing.
I mean, even the Zephyrus, like, you can't even use the Bankers to shuffle the Zephyrus because I imagine Purple is going to responsibly clear that off the board as well. And as you said, there are absolutely no win conditions left in the Paladin deck once both Shivala and Zephyrus are out of the equation.
Yes.
And oh, by the way, there's a blatant decoy on the board.
Victory is yours.
I mean, sure, yeah. That card that like sometimes pulls out your Baleful Bankalore or your Shivala from your hand to mess you up. That doesn't really seem all that important when the Shivala's just dead in that position. Like, I'm going to put my cards on the table. I don't know what Muzzy's plan was there at the end. Like, I don't understand that play, and that's okay. Like, Muzzy's a great player, and maybe he had a plan that I don't understand. I just straight up don't understand it. But what I will tell you is that, like, those last 2 turns were near impossible in terms of, like, balancing. Can I take a lethal opportunity now? Well, no, I can't. First and foremost, I need to draw my Holy Wrath. Once I get that Holy Wrath, do I take my 1 in 3? Do I take my 1 in 4? Do I try and set up a position? Like, I just said the first wacky play that occurred to me as something that might make something good happen, which was the Brawl outcome, which, you know, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but even sometimes when you lose, you stay alive and you still have a Shivala in your deck and you can keep playing Hearthstone. It didn't feel like that was a winning play for me, which is why I was interested in talking about something better. But obviously, the Frost Nova line was the thing that occurred to me first, but it was just so scary because you end that turn at 8 then a lot of the time, right?
Yes.
So then the Shivala coming into play, I was like, oh, okay, maybe. But then the Shivala just being sat there, like, I don't understand what the plan was. I genuinely don't. I'd love to know.
So ending the turn at 8, I think, was perfectly fine, given that there's only 1 board space. If Life Drinker came down, if Kobold Lackey came down, either way, there was no way to deal 8 damage in that one single turn.
Yes.
Based on the minion pressure from hand.
So, okay, so I guess also then that theory applies to killing the Shivala, right? Because if the 1 minion that comes down is a Sandstorm Elemental, it doesn't die. If the 1 minion that comes down is a Kobold Lackey, it doesn't die. So with that 1 board space, Muzzy is saying you can't kill this Shivala, but I guess the thing that you don't account for in that situation that you probably should is the Evolve. Because the Evolve on the 8-drop, like charge plus rush from an 8-drop evolving on its own is 20%. Add in every other minion on the board as well, plus that 1 board space that you have available to be able to play a Kobold Lackey or whatever else that can interact with the Shivala. It seems like a decent percentage of the time that the Shivala does go down there. What exactly that percentage is, I don't know. And then you have to compare that to, like, how likely was Muzzy to win that game, right? As opposed to whether that was the right decision in that spot or not. So, I mean, what an ending. I don't know if you have anything else to add. That was a crazy position to be in at the end of the game.
Holy Wrath Paladin is incredibly difficult to simultaneously juggle. How do I make sure I still have the window to win the game for myself while also trying to figure out how do I maximize my odds of not dying to even get that far? That is an incredibly challenging position. I do not envy being in Muzzy's seat there with my tournament life hanging in the balance.
Yeah, I do just want to sign off by saying that, like, I love that we have this caliber of player, though, where they can just get me completely confused about what's going on, and I have to spend 5 minutes working it all out. That's why I love watching Hearthstone. Hope you guys love watching Hearthstone too, because we have one more match for you coming up. We are not quite done here in the Americas region. Stay tuned.